I'm 63. A few days ago, I was sitting in a local mechanic shop waiting for an oil change on my truck. I watched one of the older technicians dealing with a heavy-duty diesel engine that was running rough. He was not replacing the fuel pump. He was not changing the injectors. He was holding a small plastic bottle of a chemical additive, a specific solvent, and he poured just a few ounces of it straight into the fuel tank. He told me the fuel the owner was using was fine, but it was breaking down too fast in the chamber before it could actually create combustion. That tiny amount of solvent stabilized the fuel. 5 minutes later, that engine stopped hesitating and started humming with a deep, steady rhythm. I watched that diesel engine level out and my mind went straight back to my own kitchen counter about 8 years ago. Because back then, I was doing exactly what the owner of that truck was doing. I was pouring what I thought was the right fuel into my system, and I was getting absolutely zero power out of it. For a long time, I believed that if you just threw enough raw material at a problem, the problem would resolve itself. I spent decades in corporate sales managing territories across the country. My entire career was built on the premise that brute force and high volume could fix any deficit. If sales were down, you made more calls. If the numbers were missing, you pushed harder. I treated my own biology the exact same way. I assumed my internal engine would always convert whatever I gave it into the performance I demanded. But biology does not respect brute force. It relies on precise mechanical pathways. And when those pathways break down, it does not matter how much fuel you pump in. When I was in my mid-50s, the reliability of my own machinery started to fade. It was not a sudden collapse. It was a slow, quiet draining of the power I was used to having. I noticed it first in my legs when I was carrying luggage through airport terminals. They felt heavy, like the circulation was fighting against gravity. And then I noticed it where it matters most to a man. The physical response that used to be a given, the rush of blood that signals readiness and makes intimacy possible, became weak. And then it became entirely unpredictable. When the machinery stops working in the dark, you lose more than just a physical capability. You lose your footing. You lose that quiet, internal baseline of confidence that lets you look people in the eye and feel like a man who is actively participating in his own life. I reacted the way men are programmed to react to physical failure. I hid it. I created distance. I started finding reasons to be busy late at night. I would sit in the living room answering emails that did not need to be answered until my wife at the time went to sleep. I blamed it on the stress of the quarterly reports. I blamed it on the travel schedule. I convinced myself that I was just exhausted. But I knew the truth. I knew the infrastructure was failing. I was a guy standing in front of a heavy door, and I no longer had the strength to push it open. The distance that grows in a house when a man refuses to talk about his own physical decline is suffocating. It is a quiet pressure that eventually breaks the foundation. You do not talk about it because admitting that the plumbing is failing feels like admitting that your time as a capable man is over. The divorce that eventually happened in my 50s was a complex thing, but that silent shame, that absolute refusal to look under the hood and fix what was broken, was a massive part of the collapse. When I finally ended up living alone in an apartment, staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, I decided I was done feeling like a passenger in a failing vehicle. I did not want to go to a clinic and get a prescription for a synthetic pill. I understood the mechanics of those medications. They force the system to open for a narrow window of time, but they do not repair the underlying delivery lines. It is like putting a massive high-pressure pump on a rusty pipe. You might get the water through for a minute, but you are completely ignoring the rust. I wanted to fix the pipe. I started doing my own research. I read everything I could find about how the male body actually generates and maintains blood flow. The mainstream advice was everywhere. Every article told men over 50 to start drinking beet juice. They said beets were packed with dietary nitrates, and the body uses those nitrates to create nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the master signal that tells the blood vessels to relax, widen, and let the blood rush in. So I went to the store. I bought expensive organic cold-pressed beet juice. I drank it every day for a month. I waited for the engine to roar back to life. Nothing happened. I felt exactly the same. The heavy legs were still there. The coldness in my hands was still there. The lack of morning response was completely unchanged. I was incredibly frustrated. I felt like the guy with the diesel engine. I was pouring the supposedly perfect fuel into the tank, and the engine was still stalling. It took me another 3 months of reading to figure out why. What I found completely shifted my understanding of how a man's body processes fuel under chronic stress. I realized that giving a 55-year-old highly stressed body a glass of beet juice is only half of the equation. Yes, the beets deliver the nitrates. Yes, the body converts those nitrates into nitric oxide. But here is the mechanical reality that nobody talks about. Nitric oxide is an incredibly fragile molecule. In a younger body, it survives long enough to do its job. But in an older body, a body that has spent decades accumulating stress, poor sleep, and inflammation, the bloodstream is full of free radicals. And those free radicals destroy nitric oxide almost the exact second it gets created. The fuel was burning off before it ever reached the engine. I was generating the signal to open the blood vessels, but the signal was being jammed before the vessels could even hear it. I needed a stabilizer. I needed something to protect that nitric oxide and force the system to sustain the flow. I needed the biological equivalent of the solvent that mechanic poured into the diesel tank. I found it in a mechanism used by guys who do extreme endurance work. They do not just rely on nitrates. They rely on an amino acid that acts as a direct, sustained catalyst for blood flow. They use a very specific compound that bypasses the rapid breakdown in the liver and goes straight to the kidneys, where it creates a slow, steady, continuous release of nitric oxide that the body cannot easily destroy. L-citrulline. It is an amino acid originally found in the rind of watermelons. It is completely natural, completely ordinary, and mechanically brilliant. When you introduce L-citrulline into a system that is already loaded with the raw nitrates from beet juice, you change the entire chemical reaction. The beets provide the massive initial spark. The citrulline provides the sustained burn. It protects the flow. It keeps the vessels wide open long after the initial rush has faded. I decided to run a very specific test. I ordered a bag of pure, unflavored L-citrulline powder. The next morning, I changed my routine. I poured my usual glass of dark red beet juice. But before I drank it, I took exactly 1 measured scoop of the L-citrulline powder, about 3 grams, and I stirred it directly into the juice. I let it dissolve. I drank it down on an empty stomach. I did not feel a sudden jolt of energy. This is not a stimulant. It is a mechanical repair. But I kept doing it. Every single morning. Beet juice. 1 scoop of citrulline. Swallow. Get on with the day. About 10 days into this new protocol, I was out running errands in the afternoon. I parked my car at the far end of a massive retail lot. It was a long walk across hot asphalt. Halfway to the store, I suddenly realized something was missing. The heavy, dragging sensation in my calves was gone. My legs felt remarkably light. I could feel a faint, steady warmth in my hands. The delivery lines were opening. The circulation was finally pushing through the resistance. And then, about 4 days later, the real proof arrived. I woke up before dawn, and the system was active. The unforced, natural physical response that I had assumed was gone forever was there. It was not a weak, momentary flicker. It was strong. It was undeniable. The engine was holding pressure again. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and I felt a wave of profound anger. I was angry that I had spent years of my life feeling inadequate, avoiding the woman I was married to, and quietly accepting my own physical decline, all because I did not understand how to stabilize the fuel in my own body. I had let my confidence erode simply because my delivery lines were dropping the signal. But the anger did not last long. It was replaced by a massive sense of relief. I was not a broken man. I had just been missing the catalyst. My life looks very different today. I am married to Alyssa now. She is a woman who values directness and emotional honesty. She expects me to be fully present. When you are with a woman who actually looks at you, you cannot hide behind a wall of fatigue. You have to be able to show up. And when your body actually responds to your intentions, the anxiety completely disappears. You stop calculating your energy levels. You stop dreading the quiet moments at the end of the day. You just participate in your own life again. I still mix that exact same drink every single morning. A glass of beet juice, 1 scoop of L-citrulline powder. I stir it, I drink it, and I go about my business. I do it because I respect the mechanics. I know that the beets are providing the raw power, and the citrulline is keeping the pipes wide open to deliver it. I'm not telling you that mixing a powder into a glass of juice is going to override a decade of terrible choices. If you are sleeping 4 hours a night, living on fast food, and carrying 50 pounds of excess weight, there is no compound on earth that will save your circulation. You still have to put in the actual work. You have to walk. You have to lift weights. You have to manage your stress. But I am telling you this. Many of you are sitting in your cars right now, gripping the steering wheel, wondering when you became an old man. You are avoiding your partner because the shame of your body failing to respond is heavier than the pain of sleeping in separate rooms. You think your time is simply up. You are probably not as broken as you think you are. You might just be burning off the fuel before it reaches the engine. You do not have to accept the heavy legs in the silent bedrooms. If you have crossed the 50-year mark, understanding the mechanics of your own circulation is the most important responsibility you have. Start looking at how you are treating the delivery lines. Consider what happens when you finally give your body both the raw material it needs and the specific catalyst required to actually use it. The machinery wants to work. It wants to deliver power. Sometimes you just have to stop the signal from breaking down, widen the pipes, and let the flow return to where it was always meant to go.